Just like there are valid forms of deductive reasoning that we see over and over again, there are also invalid forms of deductive reasoning that we see over and over again. Now, as we've mentioned before, an invalid argument is called a fallacy. So these are some common deductive fallacies. And like the valid deductive forms, we can demonstrate that these are invalid using a truth table. Now, we've already seen one of these. It was affirming the consequent. That's this one. The rest of these can be shown to be invalid in exactly the same way, and you will see those as well as you are working on the homework. So, this form was called affirming the consequent because we have a premise that tells us that the consequent, the then part of a conditional, is true. In this form, we have a premise that tells us that the antecedent, the if part of a conditional, is false. This form is called denying the antecedent. And you may be wondering, are there fancy Latin names for these? Maybe. I do not hear them used very often. So, other than the fact that we're using the words antecedent and consequent in naming these, we're going to be a little bit less formal here. So I'm only giving you one name for each of these fallacies. Now this next invalid form looks a lot like the transitive reasoning we had earlier. We have if P then Q, and then we come around and say if Q then R. And then we loop back around and say if R then P. So we're kind of spinning in a circle here. This is not what's formally called circular reasoning. This is just faulty transitive reasoning. This word faulty is not just everyday vocabulary, but it's a normal English word that you've probably heard, possibly in some context having to do with electronics. Faulty just means bad or broken, right? So faulty transitive reasoning, you tried to do transitive reasoning and something went wrong. Similarly, here we have a disjunction and then a premise that tells us that one of the things is true, and we conclude that the other one is false. Now that's not how an inclusive or works. An inclusive or, it's perfectly reasonable that they would both be true. Again, writing this out in a truth table, you see that that is absolutely why this is invalid. So this is just, we'll call it faulty deductive reasoning. So those are our common deductive fallacies. And of course, when we encounter them in real life, there's a story we're being told. We aren't given the symbols. We have to recognize that it has the form in order to recognize that it's invalid.